Chapter 1. New Beginnings. Evelyn Young watched as her youngest sister, Rebecca, kissed her new husband beneath an arch of white roses. The small Boston church erupted in applause, and Evelyn joined in, her heart swelling with both pride and an unfamiliar emptiness. The April sunshine filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the modest gathering of friends and family who had come to celebrate the union. "She looks beautiful," elderly Mrs. Graham whispered beside her, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "Yes, she does," Evelyn replied, straightening her posture as she had done countless times throughout her life when emotions threatened to overwhelm her. Rebecca, at 20, was radiant in the wedding dress Evelyn had spent 3 months sewing in the evenings after her work at the seamstress shop was done. It was worth every pricked finger to see the joy on her sister's face. The last of her siblings was now settled. George had his accounting position in New York, Mary taught at a girls' school in Philadelphia, and now Rebecca was married to the kind-hearted baker's son who had courted her for 2 years. The wedding breakfast afterward passed in a blur of congratulations and well-meaning comments that increasingly made Evelyn's smile feel fixed to her face. "You've done a remarkable job with those children, Evelyn," Reverend Phillips told her, patting her hand. "Your parents would be so proud." "When will it be your turn, dear?" Mrs. Graham asked for perhaps the 3rd time that day. "Surely now you can think of yourself." Evelyn merely nodded and moved on to cut more cake. She had perfected the art of deflecting such questions over the years. Hours later, after the newlyweds had departed for their new home above the bakery, Evelyn returned alone to the small apartment that had housed her family for 15 years. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, the silence pressing in from all sides. 5 rooms that had once echoed with squabbles, laughter, and the constant movement of 4 siblings now stood empty, but for herself and the furniture they'd gradually acquired. She moved slowly through each room, touching a chair here, straightening a picture there, finally pausing at the bedroom Rebecca had shared with her until today. The bed was neatly made, Rebecca having insisted on leaving everything just so. Evelyn sat on the edge of it, finally allowing her composure to crack. She wasn't crying for Rebecca. Her sister deserved every happiness, but she felt strange in the new situation in which she found herself. Evelyn had completed the task that had defined her adult life, raising her 3 siblings. Now she had no idea what came next. "Well," she said aloud to the empty room, her voice sounding foreign in the silence, "this won't do at all." She rose and moved to the small desk where she'd spent countless evenings helping her siblings with schoolwork. From the bottom drawer she withdrew a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with the poems and thoughts she'd rarely had time to commit to paper. 15 years ago she had been 17, preparing for teachers' college with dreams of literature and learning, when influenza had swept through Boston and taken both her parents within a week of each other. Evelyn ran her fingers over an entry dated just days before their deaths. "Professor Wilson says my essay on Wordsworth shows promise. Perhaps I might write something worth publishing someday," Mother laughed when I told her, but it was proud laughter. "First a teacher, then a writer. You've always reached for the stars, Evelyn," she said. She closed the journal with a snap. There had been no teacher's college and no writing beyond these private pages. Instead, there had been laundry and mending, working 2 jobs at times, budget ledgers, and endless meetings with schoolmasters about her siblings' education and welfare. She had worn sensible shoes and plain dresses, set aside novels for cookbooks, and sternly refused the few gentlemen who had expressed interest over the years. Her siblings had needed stability, not a brother-in-law who might upend their lives. "But what do I do now?" she asked herself. The next morning, Evelyn rose early as was her habit, though there was only herself to prepare breakfast for. She dressed in her second-best dress, a dark blue wool that had been let out twice at the seams, and walked to the seamstress shop where she had worked for the past decade. "Mrs. Holloway," she said to her employer, a kind widow who had been more than understanding about Evelyn's family responsibilities. "I've come to discuss my future here." 2 hours later, Evelyn left with the promise of additional responsibilities and a modest increase in wages. It should have felt like triumph. Mrs. Holloway had even suggested Evelyn might take over the business when she retired in a few years. Instead, as Evelyn walked through the bustling streets of Boston, she felt strangely dissatisfied. She stopped at a newsstand to purchase the daily paper and a sweet bun from the vendor. The spring air held a promise of warmth as she settled on a bench in the small park near the apartment. As she ate her bun, she opened the paper and scanned its contents with the efficiency of someone accustomed to stolen moments of reading. It was in the back pages, among advertisements for elixirs and household goods, that she saw it. A small notice seeking correspondence for lonely frontiersmen, placed by a matrimonial agency. Evelyn normally would have passed over such things with faint distaste, but one entry caught her eye. Established Texas rancher, 40, widowed with young daughter, seeks practical, kind-hearted woman of good character as wife, must be over 25, willing to embrace ranch life, no previous experience required, only willingness to learn. Randy Whitaker. Evelyn read it twice, then folded the paper shut with a decisive snap. Such arrangements were not uncommon, she knew, particularly in the Western Territories, where women were scarce. She had even heard of a friend who had gone to Oregon as a mail-order bride 10 years ago, and was reportedly quite content. Still, the idea seemed so foreign to her orderly life that she pushed it aside and continued her day. But that night, in the quiet house, she found herself retrieving the newspaper and reading the advertisement again. The practical part of her mind began to analyze it against her current prospects. Boston held nothing for her now but memories and a future that promised to be a paler version of her past. Texas, she said aloud, testing the word. She had never been farther west than Worcester. The next morning, she found herself at the offices of the matrimonial agency, a discreet establishment on a respectable street. The woman behind the desk, Mrs. Eleanor Grice, was impeccably dressed and spoke with the refined accent of Boston's better neighborhoods. "Mr. Whitaker is one of our most promising candidates," Mrs. Grice explained, bringing forth a thin file. "His first wife died in childbirth 5 years ago. He owns a substantial cattle ranch near San Antonio, is well respected in the community, and his financial references are impeccable." "And the daughter?" Evelyn asked, practical concerns foremost. 7 years old, I believe. From his letter, she seems to be in need of a mother's guidance. Mrs. Grice smiled. "Your experience raising siblings would be quite valuable there." Evelyn hesitated. "I should like to correspond first before any decisions are made." "Of course," Mrs. Grice agreed. "That's the most sensible approach." The first letter Evelyn wrote to Randy Whitaker was stiff with formality, outlining her background, skills, and circumstances. His reply came 3 weeks later, equally formal but with unexpected touches of wry humor about ranch life and a genuine tone when he spoke of his daughter Caroline. "She is a wild little thing, more comfortable with horses than people, I'm afraid," he wrote. "I have been father and mother both, and I fear I've done a poor job of the latter. She needs a woman's influence, someone patient and kind who might teach her there's more to life than cattle and dirt." Evelyn found herself writing back the same evening, her pen flowing more easily than before. She told him about raising her siblings, the minor triumphs and frustrations, and even included a small paragraph about teaching Rebecca to sew. "She stabbed herself so many times that first day that I feared she'd give up entirely, but I rapped her finger and told her that learning meant making mistakes, and the next day she was bent over that sampler again, tongue poking out in concentration." His reply came faster this time, and with each exchange the formality between them eased. Evelyn found herself looking forward to the sight of his bold handwriting, the descriptions of Texas landscapes so different from the crowded streets of Boston, and his measured optimism about what their futures might hold together. After 6 weeks of correspondence, his letter arrived with a proposal. "I believe we could build something worthwhile together, Evelyn. I offer you a home, my name, and my respect. I cannot promise romance such as younger folks might seek, but I do promise honesty, consideration, and partnership. Should you accept, I will forward the funds for your journey and meet you at the station in San Antonio." Evelyn read the letter perhaps a dozen times. That night, she removed a small box from the back of her closet and set it on her bed and removed its possessions. There was a small baby quilt her mother had made, a few books, her mother's cameo, her father's pocket watch, and the journal filled with dreams. These were items she would take if she agreed to Randy's proposal. After careful thought, she made the decision quickly. Though she had a steady job in Boston, she had no prospects for marriage. All of the young men who had shown interest in her over the years were no longer around, and even though she had this nice house, she was considered an old maid. This proposal from Randy might be her last chance to have a family. With resolve, she sat at her desk and began to write her acceptance. As she wrote, a sense of peace spread through her, letting her know that her decision was the right one. But she also found herself adding an unexpected postscript. I have spent my life being practical, Randy. I have no illusions about romance at our age. But I hope we might find not just a partnership but also a friendship in our future together. The 6 weeks between her acceptance and departure passed with dizzying speed. George came from New York to see her off, his face creased with concern. "You don't have to do this, Evelyn," he said as they walked arm in arm through the park where they had played as children. "You could come to New York, or join Mary in Philadelphia." Evelyn patted his hand. "I've looked after all of you for 15 years, George. Perhaps it's time I found my own way. But in Texas, with a stranger?" "He's not a stranger anymore," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "And yes, Texas, it's something new." On her final evening in Boston, Evelyn sat alone in the stripped house, ready for the new family who was to move in the next day. Her trunk was packed and waiting by the door. She opened her journal and, after a moment's hesitation, began to write. "Tomorrow I leave behind all I have known for an uncertain future. Some might call it desperation, others folly, but tonight I name it courage. I am 32 years old, and for the first time I am choosing my own path. I will travel to meet Randy Whitaker, a man I know only through ink and paper, to become a wife and mother in a place I've never seen. I am terrified. I am cautiously excited. I am, perhaps for the first time, truly alive." The next morning dawned clear and cool. Evelyn wore her best traveling suit, a deep burgundy wool that she had carefully refashioned from one of Mrs. Holloway's cast-offs. Her hair was neatly coiled beneath a modest hat, and she carried only a small valise for the journey, her trunk having been sent ahead to the station. The conductor called the final boarding for the westbound train. Evelyn stood at the edge of the platform, suddenly hesitant. Behind her lay the only life she had known, the security of familiarity, the graves of her parents, the streets where her siblings had grown from children to adults under her care. Ahead lay Randy Whitaker, his daughter Caroline, and a ranch she could barely imagine, in a land where the sky was reportedly as big as the ocean.
"Last call for boarding."
Evelyn took a deep breath, picked up her valise, and stepped onto the train. Finding her seat by the window, she watched as Boston's familiar buildings slid away into the distance. Though her heart hammered in her chest, she felt something inside. It was a profound hope. Chapter 2. First Impressions. Evelyn stepped onto the platform at San Antonio Station, her legs stiff from 3 days of travel. The late afternoon sun blazed with an intensity she had never experienced in Boston, and she immediately regretted the heaviness of her burgundy traveling suit. Passengers streamed around her as she stood momentarily frozen, squinting against the brightness while clutching her valise. Texas was loud. That was her first coherent thought. The station hummed with voices carrying unfamiliar drawls, the clatter of luggage carts, and calls of porters that echoed off the high ceiling. She took a breath and moved forward, scanning the crowd for the man she knew only from his precise handwriting and one small daguerreotype that had accompanied his third letter. But she recognized him immediately. Randy Whitaker stood near the exit, taller than she had imagined from his photograph. He wore a clean if somewhat worn suit and a wide-brimmed hat he removed as she approached. His face was deeply tanned with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years squinting into the Texas sun. His hair, once dark blonde according to his description, was now lightly streaked with gray at the temples. Evelyn suddenly felt intensely self-conscious about her own appearance after the long journey. She smoothed her skirt with one gloved hand and forced herself to continue walking toward him. "Mr. Whitaker?" she asked, though she knew it was him. "Miss Young." He nodded, a quick, jerky movement that betrayed his own nervousness. His eyes, a startling clear blue, assessed her with a directness that might have been offensive had it not been so clearly devoid of impropriety. "You made it safely?" "Yes, though I confess the journey was longer than I anticipated." An awkward silence fell between them. In the letters, conversation had flowed easily enough, but now, faced with the reality of each other, neither seemed to know where to begin. Randy cleared his throat. "Your trunk?" "I have the claim ticket here," she fumbled in her reticule. "I'll see to it. Would you care to wait over there, out of the sun?" He gestured toward a shaded bench. Evelyn made her way to the bench while Randy handled the collection of her trunk. She watched him move through the crowd with efficient purpose, saying little to the porter but conveying his needs with concise gestures. He was a man of few words, it seemed, at least in person. When he returned, he carried her trunk as if it weighed nothing, setting it on a wagon that waited outside the station. "It's about 2 hours to the ranch," he explained, helping her climb onto the wagon seat. "We'll stop in town for some refreshment first, if that suits you. Then we'll head to the church." "Those plans sound great," Evelyn replied, arranging her skirts on the wooden seat. She felt her heart skip at the thought that she would be exchanging vows with this man, who was a virtual stranger to her. The small town of San Antonio was unlike anything Evelyn had seen before. Buildings of wood and stone stood in neat rows, but beyond them stretched open land that seemed to continue forever. People moved with unhurried purpose, many nodding respectfully to Randy as they passed. He was clearly known here, though he acknowledged the greetings with minimal responses. At a small cafe, Randy ordered coffee and pie for them both. The proprietress, a round woman with graying hair, beamed at Evelyn with undisguised curiosity. "So you're the Boston lady we've heard about," she said, setting down their plates. "Randy here's been mighty quiet about the details." "Mrs. Henderson," Randy said, his tone carrying a warning. "Oh, hush. Can't blame a soul for being curious." She waved a hand towards Randy before turning back to Evelyn. "Welcome to Texas, honey. If you need anything at all, you just come see Mabel Henderson." "Thank you," Evelyn said, genuinely touched by the warmth in the woman's manner. "That's very kind." After Mrs. Henderson had moved away, Randy spoke quietly. "Folk here mean well, but they do like to talk. I hope that won't trouble you too much." "I'm accustomed to neighbors taking an interest," Evelyn assured him, taking a sip of the strong coffee. "In Boston, our neighborhood was full of women who considered everyone's business their own." A hint of a smile briefly softened Randy's weathered features. "Then you'll do fine here." They ate mostly in silence, each stealing glances at the other when they thought themselves unobserved. Evelyn noted the strength in Randy's hands, the care he took to use proper manners despite their rustic surroundings, and the way his eyes would occasionally drift to the window, as if checking the position of the sun. "We should have gone to the church," he finally said, placing coins on the table. "I'd prefer to reach the ranch before dark." Evelyn only nodded and followed Randy to the wagon. The next few minutes seemed to pass in a blur. The preacher didn't blink an eye when Randy informed him that they needed to be married. With his wife and daughter as witnesses, the ceremony was soon over. In fact, as she looked back at San Antonio, the wedding had occurred so fast. Evelyn wondered if she would someday be able to recall the details of it happening at all. Even though this marriage had been very different from her sister's from 2 months ago, Evelyn hadn't expected a fancy dress and pomp and circumstance from the preacher, but she had expected something more. Even the kiss that Randy had given her to seal the vows they had spoken had seemed trite. She had to remind herself of the reason why she had accepted Randy's proposal: to be a mother to his young daughter. He had been frank with her in his letters and she had agreed. The landscape unfolding beyond the town limits left Evelyn speechless. Rolling hills stretched to the horizon, dotted with occasional stands of trees and grazing cattle. The sky arched overhead in a vast blue expanse that made her feel simultaneously small and free. "It's so open," she finally said. Randy glanced at her. "Too open for a city woman?" "Different," she corrected, "but not unpleasantly so." The wagon rumbled along a dirt road, kicking up dust that settled on Evelyn's traveling suit. She didn't mind. The burgundy wool was unsuitable for this climate anyway. The rhythmic creak of the wheels and the steady plod of the horses created a lulling background to the occasional comments Randy made about landmarks they passed. "The creek never runs dry, even in summer," he said, nodding toward a stream they crossed. "There is good fishing there." And later, Randy spoke again. "That's the Miller property. They run sheep mostly." Evelyn listened, trying to absorb the geography of what would be her new home, but found herself increasingly distracted by thoughts of what awaited her at the ranch itself. Randy had mentioned his daughter several times in his letters, though the details had been sparse. He had written eloquently of his ranch operations, the weather, and even his hopes for their practical partnership, but Caroline remained a ghost-like figure in his correspondence. "Tell me about your daughter," Evelyn said finally, breaking a lengthy silence. After all, if she were to be the child's new mother, she needed some more details. Randy's hands tightened on the reins. "Caroline? She's 7 now. She is a quiet child, mostly keeps to herself. Is she looking forward to my arrival?" Evelyn carefully avoided the word mother, unsure of how Randy had framed her coming to the girl. "She knows you're arriving today," he answered, which Evelyn noted wasn't really an answer at all. Before she could press further, Randy pointed ahead. "There it is, Whitaker Ranch." A sprawling single-story house came into view, painted white with green shutters and a wide porch wrapping around 2 sides. Behind it stood several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. The setting sun cast the whole scene in a golden light that made it look almost unreal to Evelyn's eyes. It was like an illustration from one of the adventure novels her brother George had loved as a boy. As they pulled up before the house, the door opened and a small, serious-faced girl with dark curly hair appeared on the porch. She wore a simple cotton dress that stopped above her ankles, revealing scuffed boots beneath. Her blue eyes, so much like her father's, regarded Evelyn without expression. "Caroline," Randy called, setting the brake on the wagon, "come meet Miss Young." The girl approached with cautious steps as Randy helped Evelyn down from the wagon. Up close, Evelyn could see the delicate features that must have come from the child's mother. She had high cheekbones and a cupid's bow mouth currently pressed into a firm line. "Hello, Caroline," Evelyn said, smiling warmly, determined to keep her voice welcoming and pleasant, even though she could immediately tell that the child was not happy with her arrival. "I'm very pleased to meet you." Caroline glanced up at her father, then back to Evelyn. "Hello," she said softly, then asked her father, "Can I go help Joshua with the horses now?" "In a minute. First, show Miss Young to the guest room. Mrs. Rodriguez should have it ready." Randy's words to Caroline just answered the unspoken question Evelyn had in her mind, of whether she would be sharing a room with him. It seemed as if her new husband was giving her some time to get used to their marriage. The girl hesitated as if she wanted to argue, but then she nodded and turned toward the house without another word, clearly expecting Evelyn to follow. Randy cleared his throat. "I'll bring in your trunk shortly," he said. "Dinner's at 6. Evelyn followed Caroline into a surprisingly spacious entryway. The interior of the house was clean and functional, with solid furniture that spoke of practicality rather than fashion. Caroline led her down a hallway to a bedroom at the rear of the house. "This is your room," the girl said, pushing open the door. "The washroom is across the hall." The bedroom was larger than Evelyn had expected, with a comfortable-looking bed, a chest of drawers, a small writing desk by the window, and a rocking chair in one corner. Someone had placed a vase of wildflowers on the nightstand, their bright colors a cheerful welcome. Thank you, Caroline, it's lovely, Evelyn said, removing her hat. Did you pick these flowers? The girl shook her head. Mrs. Rodriguez did, she's our housekeeper. Well, they're very pretty, perhaps you and I could pick some together someday soon. Caroline's expression remained unchanged. I don't really pick flowers. I help Papa with the horses and the cattle. Before Evelyn could respond, a woman's voice called from another part of the house. Caroline? Is the senora here? Yes, I showed her the room, Caroline called back, then turned to Evelyn. I'm going to find Joshua now. The girl slipped away before Evelyn could say anything else, leaving her alone in the unfamiliar room. She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. The long journey, the vast difference between Boston and Texas, the reserved man who was to be her husband, and his clearly reluctant daughter. It was all so much more complicated than the neat agreements in their letters had suggested. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A stout woman with warm brown skin and salt and pepper hair stood in the doorway, a kind but assessing expression on her face. Senora Young, I am Mrs. Rodriguez. I keep house for Mr. Whitaker. Please, call me Evelyn, she said, rising to her feet. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Rodriguez. The older woman nodded, her dark eyes taking in every detail of Evelyn's appearance. Dinner will be ready at 6. There is hot water in the washroom if you wish to refresh yourself. Thank you. I'd appreciate that very much. After Mrs. Rodriguez left, Randy arrived with her trunk, setting it down with careful consideration. I hope the room suits you, he said, lingering awkwardly by the door. It's perfect, Evelyn assured him. You have a lovely home. It's practical, he replied, glancing around as if seeing it through her eyes. Emma, my late wife, had plans to make it more homey, I suppose. She never got the chance. The mention of his first wife hung in the air between them, and Evelyn realized that this was the first she had heard Emma's name. She was beginning to realize she knew very little about this man who stood before her. Caroline seems like a very self-sufficient young lady, Evelyn said gently. Randy's expression shifted, a shadow crossing his features. Too much so at times. She's had to be with only me and the ranch hands for company. He hesitated, then added, I should let you rest before dinner. Mrs. Rodriguez will show you around the house tomorrow. After he left, Evelyn unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses in the wardrobe and placing her journal and books on the small desk. She washed the travel dust from her face and hands, changed into a simpler dress of gray cotton, and pinned her hair into a fresh chignon. Dinner was a quiet affair. Randy spoke mainly of ranch business such as the cattle count, a fence needing repair, and plans for expanding the operation. Caroline pushed food around her plate and answered direct questions with the minimum required words. Mrs. Rodriguez served silently, occasionally shooting Evelyn sympathetic glances. I thought perhaps tomorrow I might help with some household tasks, Evelyn ventured during a lull in conversation. I'd like to learn the routines here. Mrs. Rodriguez handles the house, Randy replied, but I'm sure she wouldn't mind showing you how things are done. And Caroline? Evelyn said, turning to the girl who was studying her plate with great concentration. Perhaps you could show me around the ranch after your lessons? The child's head shot up with a look of defiance in her eyes. I don't take lessons anymore. Miss Watkins left last year. Evelyn looked to Randy in surprise. Oh, I assumed Caroline's last governess found ranch life challenging, Randy explained, discomfort evident in his tone. We've had difficulty finding a suitable replacement, and it's too far for Caroline to go into town for school. I see. Evelyn took a careful sip of water. I taught all my siblings their letters and figures when they were about Caroline's age. Perhaps I could continue her education? Randy looked relieved. That would be helpful. Caroline's expression, however, had darkened considerably. Papa said you were coming to be his wife, not my teacher. Caroline, Randy admonished, his voice sharp. Mind your manners. It's all right, Evelyn said quickly. It's a fair observation. She turned to the girl. Your father and I will be married, yes, but I hope we might be friends too, Caroline. I've never lived on a ranch before, and I'll need someone smart to show me how things work here." The girl regarded her suspiciously. "You want to learn about the ranch?" "I do. I've always believed that learning new things keeps life interesting." Caroline seemed to consider this, then shrugged one small shoulder. "I guess I could show you the horses tomorrow." "I'd like that very much," Evelyn said, catching Randy's grateful glance. Later that night, Evelyn lay awake in her new bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Texas night. She could hear the chirp of crickets, the occasional distant lowing of cattle, and the creak of the house settling. The day's events also replayed in her mind, like Randy's reserved manner, Caroline's guarded interactions, and the sprawling ranch that was to be her home. In his letters, Randy had presented himself as a man seeking a practical partnership, a wife to share his home. But watching him with Caroline, Evelyn had glimpsed something more complicated. Randy was a father desperate to provide what his daughter needed, but he was also a man still shadowed by grief, seeking not just a wife, but someone to heal what had been broken 5 years ago when his wife had died. Evelyn rolled onto her side, staring into the darkness. She had come to Texas seeking a new purpose and a fresh start. Instead, she found herself stepping into a role far more complex than she had anticipated, with expectations that had never been clearly articulated in Randy's careful letters. Had she made a terrible mistake, committing herself to a family whose wounds ran deeper than she could possibly heal? The vastness of Texas, so awe-inspiring during the journey to the ranch, now felt overwhelming in its permanence. Boston and its familiar comforts had never seemed so far away. Chapter 3: Finding Common Ground. Evelyn woke before dawn on her 5th day at Whitaker Ranch, already accustomed to the chorus of roosters that served as nature's alarm clock. She dressed quickly in one of the simpler dresses she had brought from Boston, her fingers moving nimbly through the familiar routine of buttons and hooks. The house was quiet, except for the sounds of Mrs. Rodriguez preparing breakfast in the kitchen. Outside her window, the sky held the pearlescent quality of approaching sunrise. In the distance, she could see Randy already at work, his tall figure moving among the corrals with the easy confidence of a man in his element. Their interactions since her arrival had been cordial but brief, each careful not to intrude upon the other's space. Evelyn made her bed, then paused at the small mirror to pin her hair into its usual neat arrangement. The face that looked back at her showed signs of Texas already. She had a slight flush from yesterday's sun and a scattering of freckles across her nose that hadn't been there in Boston. "Another day," she whispered to herself, straightening her shoulders. The last few days had been challenging, to say the least. In the kitchen, Mrs. Rodriguez acknowledged her with a nod as she positioned herself at the large cast-iron stove. The older woman had been polite but reserved, watching Evelyn carefully as if waiting to see what kind of mistress she would prove to be. "Good morning," Evelyn said. "May I help with breakfast?" "It is near ready, Signora," Mrs. Rodriguez replied, her tone respectful but maintaining the distance she had kept since Evelyn's arrival. "Please, I meant what I said about calling me Evelyn." She moved to the cabinet, retrieving plates for the table. "And I would genuinely like to be useful." The housekeeper's expression softened slightly. "The Mina have been working since before dawn. They will be hungry. Perhaps you could take more coffee to sideboard." It was a small concession, but Evelyn accepted it gladly, filling the large coffee pot and carrying it to the dining room. As she arranged the cups, Caroline appeared in the doorway, her dark curls still mussed from sleep, and her face bearing the imprint of her pillow. "Good morning, Caroline," Evelyn said with deliberate cheerfulness. "Did you sleep well?" The girl shrugged one shoulder, a gesture Evelyn was coming to recognize as her standard response to most questions. "Is Papa back yet?" Caroline's question didn't surprise Evelyn. The child seemed calm only when she knew exactly where Randy was at all times. It hadn't taken Evelyn long to realize that Caroline had a difficult time being separated from him. "I saw him by the corrals earlier. I expect he'll be in for breakfast shortly." Caroline climbed onto her chair at the table, watching as Evelyn continued to arrange the breakfast settings. "You're doing it wrong," she said finally. Evelyn paused. I'm sorry? Papa likes his cup on the left, not the right. Ha. Evelyn made the adjustment, even though it was more proper to place the cup on the left. Thank you for telling me. Are there other things I should know about how your father prefers things? Caroline seemed to consider whether to answer, studying Evelyn with those startlingly blue eyes that so resembled her father's. He doesn't like talking in the mornings, she said finally, and he wants the newspaper even though he doesn't really read it until after supper. That's helpful, Caroline, thank you. The girl nodded, looking pleased despite herself. It was the longest conversation they had shared since Evelyn's arrival. The kitchen door swung open and Randy entered, followed by 2 ranch hands. There was Joshua, his foreman, whom Evelyn had met briefly, and a younger man named Miguel. All 3 men smelled of horses and early morning labor. The coffee smells good, Randy said by way of greeting, nodding to Evelyn as he took his place at the head of the table. He looked tired, and the lines around his eyes were more pronounced than usual. Breakfast proceeded with minimal conversation. Randy and his men discussed ranch business, such as fences that needed repair, a mare about to foal, and weather predictions for the coming week. Evelyn listened attentively, trying to absorb the unfamiliar terminology. Caroline ate silently, occasionally glancing between her father and Evelyn as if she were trying to solve a puzzle. After the men had returned to work and Caroline had wandered off to the small collection of books in the parlor, Evelyn returned to the kitchen, where Mrs. Rodriguez was cleaning up. I've been thinking, Evelyn said carefully, that I might make a few adjustments to how things are arranged in here to make the workflow more efficient. Mrs. Rodriguez stiffened almost imperceptibly. The kitchen has been arranged this way since Mr. Whitaker built the house. Of course, and it's lovely, Evelyn said quickly. I only thought that perhaps moving the baking supplies closer to the work table might save steps. The older woman's expression remained neutral, but Evelyn sensed her resistance. As you wish, Signora. It is you home now. Evelyn wanted to correct the formal address again, but sensed it would be futile. She also wanted to point out that she wasn't Mrs. Whitaker, not yet at least. I value your experience, Mrs. Rodriguez. Perhaps we could try a few small changes and see if they help? The housekeeper nodded but said nothing further as Evelyn began to assess the kitchen's layout. Over the next 2 hours, she gradually reorganized the baking supplies, rearranged some of the cooking implements, and sorted through a cabinet of rarely used items. The work was satisfying, giving her a sense of purpose she had been missing since her arrival. By midday, the kitchen looked substantially different. Evelyn stood back, pleased with the changes. The flour, sugar, and other baking staples now sat within easy reach of the work table rather than across the room. The pots and pans hung in order of size rather than in the seemingly random arrangement she had found. Everything remained spotlessly clean, but now followed a system Evelyn found more logical. She was just finishing when she heard the back door open and turned to find Randy standing in the doorway, his expression frozen as he surveyed the transformed space. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice unnaturally flat. "I've just made a few adjustments," Evelyn quickly explained, gesturing to the reorganized shelves. "I thought it might make things more convenient for meal preparation." Randy said nothing, but his jaw tightened visibly as his gaze swept over the changes. "Is something wrong?" Evelyn asked, sensing the sudden tension. "Emma arranged this kitchen," he said finally, each word measured. "She spent weeks getting everything exactly as she wanted it." Evelyn's heart sank. In her enthusiasm to be useful, she had blundered into territory far more significant than simple household organization. She hadn't realized that it had been Emma who had arranged the kitchen instead of the housekeeper. "I'm sorry, Randy. I didn't realize—" "Oh, you didn't," he interrupted, his voice tight, "because you didn't ask." The rebuke stung more than Evelyn expected. "I was only trying to help. By erasing the last thing my wife created in our home?" His expression darkened. "Mrs. Rodriguez has managed just fine with things as they were." Evelyn's cheeks burned with embarrassment and a flicker of anger. I didn't mean to erase anything. I'm just trying to find my place here. Your place is not to change everything the moment you arrive. Randy was struggling to maintain his composure. This is still Caroline's home, and there are memories here that matter to her, to us. Of course there are, Evelyn said, her own voice rising slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. But I'm here now too, Randy. You asked me to come, to be your wife, and to help with Caroline. How am I supposed to do any of that if I'm expected to tiptoe around invisible boundaries? Randy looked away, his profile rigid. I need to get back to work. We can discuss this later. He left without another word, the door closing firmly behind him. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen. The satisfaction she had felt in her morning's work now transformed into a hollow ache. She began methodically returning items to their original positions, fighting back tears of frustration. Mrs. Rodriguez found her there 20 minutes later, silently working. You do not need to change it back, Senora, the older woman said quietly. Evelyn looked up, surprised. Randy was upset. I should have asked first. Mrs. Rodriguez sighed, leaning against the doorframe. Mr. Whitaker has kept many things exactly as they were when his Emma died. It is not good, but grief does not always follow good sense. She gestured to the partially restored shelves. Your way was better. More practical. Thank you, Evelyn said, touched by the unexpected support. But I think for now, it's best to respect how things were done before. The housekeeper studied her for a long moment. You are patient. This is good. He will see it in time. Chapter 4, The Storm. That afternoon, heavy clouds gathered on the horizon, bringing the promise of the spring storm that had been threatening for days. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened to an ominous slate gray, and the wind had picked up considerably, carrying the rich scent of coming rain. Evelyn sat on the porch, helping Caroline with her reading lesson. The girl was bright but had clearly received inconsistent instruction. Her knowledge was full of gaps that Evelyn carefully worked to fill. Their daily lessons had become a tentative bridge between them, with Caroline gradually relaxing her guard during these structured interactions. I think we should finish for today, Evelyn said, noting the darkening sky. That storm looks like it's moving in quickly. Caroline glanced up from her book. Papa's still out checking the north pasture. He should be back soon. As if in response to her words, a flash of lightning split the sky, followed seconds later by a powerful roll of thunder. Caroline jumped, her eyes widening. Why don't we go inside and help Mrs. Rodriguez prepare for dinner? Evelyn suggested, gathering their books. They had just reached the door when the first heavy raindrops began to fall, quickly becoming a deluge. Evelyn looked anxiously toward the north pasture, but could see little through the curtain of rain now obscuring the view. An hour passed, then another. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it grew more intense, with lightning flashing in rapid succession and wind howling around the corners of the house. Caroline grew increasingly anxious, watching the windows and startling at each thundercrack. Papa knows what to do in storms, she said, more to herself than to Evelyn. He's probably in the north barn. Evelyn sat beside the girl on the parlor sofa. I'm sure you're right. Your father is very capable. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, her expression one of concern. The creek may flood if this continues. The Nord barn. She hesitated, glancing at Caroline. Evelyn understood the unspoken worry. Caroline, why don't you help Mrs. Rodriguez set the table while I check on something? Once the girl had left the room, Evelyn turned to the housekeeper. You're worried about Randy? The Nord barn seats low. If the creek rises... The older woman crossed herself. Mr. Joshua has gone to look, but in this weather... Evelyn made a quick decision, moving to the hook by the door where Randy's oilskin coat hung. I'll go. Senora, no, it is too dangerous. I won't go far, Evelyn promised, pulling on the oversized coat. Just to the main barn to see if I can spot anything. Before Mrs. Rodriguez could protest further, Evelyn slipped out into the storm. The rain immediately plastered her skirts to her legs, making walking difficult. The wind threatened to tear the coat from her shoulders as she struggled toward the main barn, barely visible through the downpour. She had almost reached the barn door when it swung open, revealing Randy silhouetted against the lantern light inside. He froze at the sight of her, then rushed forward, grasping her arm. "Evelyn, what in God's name are you doing out here?" "Looking for you," she shouted over the storm's roar, relief flooding through her. Mrs. Rodriguez was worried about the north barn flooding. "Get inside," he ordered, pulling her toward the barn door. The interior was dry and surprisingly warm, filled with the comforting smells of hay and horses. Several lanterns hung from posts, casting a golden glow over the stalls. Randy closed the door against the storm, then turned to Evelyn, his expression a mixture of concern and exasperation. "That was foolish," he said, taking in her drenched appearance. "You could have been struck by lightning or swept off your feet in this wind." Evelyn pushed wet strands of hair from her face. "I was worried. We all were." Something in her voice must have reached him, for his expression softened. "I appreciate the concern, but I've weathered worse storms than this." He gestured to a bale of hay. "Sit down before you catch your death. We'll have to wait it out here for a while." Evelyn sank onto the hay, suddenly aware of how cold and wet she was, despite the coat. Randy disappeared into a back room, returning with a rough blanket that he draped around her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, drawing it close. "Is the north barn safe?" "Joshua and I moved the horses this morning when we saw the storm building." Randy sat on another hay bale, keeping a careful distance between them. "The creek's already over its banks, but the livestock is secure." They sat in silence for several minutes, listening to the storm rage outside and the occasional soft nickering of horses in their stalls. The awkwardness of their earlier confrontation hung between them. "I'm sorry about the kitchen," Evelyn said finally. "I should have asked first." Randy rubbed a hand across his face. "No, I overreacted. You couldn't have known." "Even so, it was presumptuous of me to change things so quickly." She hesitated. "It must be strange, having someone new in your home after so long." "Strange doesn't begin to describe it," he admitted. His eyes met hers, and for the first time since her arrival, she felt he was truly seeing her. 5 years is a long time to grow accustomed to certain ways. "Tell me about her," Evelyn said gently. "About Emma." Randy looked startled by the request, then thoughtful. "She was bright, always laughing, making plans. She grew up on a farm near Austin and took to ranch life easily." A small smile touched his lips. "She used to say the kitchen was her domain, because the rest of the ranch belonged to the cattle and horses. She sounds easy to get along with." She was. Randy looked down at his hands. She died when Caroline was 2 years old, and it felt like all that brightness that she carried left our world. The raw honesty in his voice moved Evelyn deeply. "I think you've done admirably. Caroline is an extraordinary child. She deserves better than what I've been able to give her." "Is that why you wrote to the matrimonial agency?" "Partly. I'd been watching her grow up without any female guidance, becoming more withdrawn, more like me." He shook his head. "And after 5 years, the silence in the house had become unbearable." Evelyn pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I understand loneliness," she said quietly. "After my siblings were grown, the quiet nearly drove me mad some days." "Tell me about them," Randy said, his voice gentler than she had ever heard it. Evelyn found herself speaking of George, Mary, and Rebecca. She described the struggles and small triumphs of raising them, of teaching George to tie his shoes and helping Mary overcome her fear of mathematics. The stories flowed easily, punctuated by the rhythmic drumming of rain on the barn roof. "You gave up a lot to raise them," Randy observed when she finished. "As did you, focusing solely on Caroline and the ranch." Their eyes met in mutual recognition of shared sacrifice. He shifted slightly closer on his hay bale. "What were your dreams," he asked, "before your parents died?" The question caught Evelyn off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked about her own aspirations. I wanted to be a teacher, she said, perhaps even write a novel someday. And now? Evelyn considered the question. Now? I'm not entirely sure. For so long my purpose was clear. I needed to raise my siblings and keep our family together. When our parents died, some neighbors wanted to put my brother and sisters in an orphanage. I was only 15, and they felt I was too young to take care of them, but I insisted on giving it a try. I don't regret giving up my dreams, and once they were on their own, I found a new direction, which led me here. She looked at him directly. I suppose I'm still discovering what comes next. Randy looked at her thoughtfully. That makes two of us. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by another roll of thunder, more distant now as the storm began to move away. We should probably head back to the house when the rain eases, Randy said eventually. Caroline will be worried. Yes, she... Evelyn stopped suddenly, remembering the girl's face when she had left. Randy, did she seem warm to you this morning? Her cheeks were flushed during our lessons. Randy frowned. I didn't notice anything unusual, but I left before dawn. It's probably nothing, Evelyn said, trying to reassure herself as much as him. Children often get warm when concentrating. The rain had diminished to a steady patter by the time they made their way back to the house. Mrs. Rodriguez met them at the door, her expression troubled. Benigna is not well, she has a fever. Randy glanced at Evelyn and immediately strode toward Caroline's room, Evelyn close behind. The girl lay in her small bed, her face flushed and dark curls damp with sweat. Her eyes opened as they entered, unnaturally bright. Papa, she said weakly, I don't feel good. Randy knelt beside the bed, his hand gentle on her forehead. You're burning up, little one. Evelyn moved to the other side of the bed, her mind already cataloging symptoms and possible remedies, many she had used on her siblings when they fell ill. How long has she been like this, Mrs. Rodriguez? The fever came on quickly after you left, Senora. I gave her willow bark tea, but it has not helped much. Evelyn rolled up her sleeves. We'll need cool water and cloths, and more willow bark tea, stronger this time. She met Randy's worried gaze across the bed. I've nursed my siblings through many fevers. We'll get her through this. The concern in his eyes was mingled with something that looked remarkably like trust. For the first time since her arrival at Whitaker Ranch, Evelyn felt the tentative foundation of true understanding forming between them, built on the shared ground of their concern for Caroline. She reached across the bed to briefly touch his hand. She'll be all right. I promise. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind the fresh scent of rain-washed earth and the promise of clearer skies ahead. Chapter 5, Growing Bonds. For 3 days and nights, Caroline's fever burned like a stubborn wildfire. Evelyn split her time between the girl's bedside and the kitchen, preparing remedies her mother had taught her long ago. She slept in short bursts, curled in the rocking chair beside Caroline's bed, alert to every change in the child's breathing. You need rest, Randy told her on the second night, appearing in the doorway with a cup of coffee. Evelyn accepted the cup gratefully. I'll rest when her fever breaks. This is the critical night. Randy lingered, watching as Evelyn gently bathed Caroline's flushed face with a cool cloth. You've done this before. Many times. Mary was prone to fevers as a child. She wrung out the cloth, her movements practiced and efficient. George once had a fever so high he spoke to people who weren't there for nearly 2 days. And he recovered? Evelyn smiled at the concern in Randy's voice. Completely. As will Caroline. The third night, shortly after midnight, Caroline's fever finally broke. Evelyn was checking the child's forehead when she felt the difference. The burning heat had subsided, replaced by the natural warmth of sleep. Caroline's breathing had deepened, and her small face looked peaceful for the first time in days. Randy, Evelyn called softly, knowing he was just outside the door where he had been keeping his own vigil. Come see. He entered immediately, his face drawn with fatigue and worry. Evelyn took his hand and guided it to Caroline's forehead. The fever's broken, she said. Relief transformed his features. In the lamplight, Evelyn could see the moisture gathering in his eyes before he quickly blinked it away. "She'll be all right now?" "She'll be weak for a few days, but yes, she's through the worst of it." Evelyn suppressed a yawn. Now that the immediate danger had passed, 3 days of minimal sleep were catching up with her rapidly. "Go to bed, Evelyn," Randy said gently. "I'll sit with her for the rest of the night." She wanted to protest but found she lacked the energy. "Promise that you will wake me if she needs anything." "I will." Evelyn stumbled to her room, barely managing to remove her shoes before collapsing onto her bed. She was asleep within moments. When she woke, golden afternoon light was streaming through her window. She sat up with a start, disoriented by the angle of the sun. "Mrs. Rodriguez," she called, hastily pinning up her hair as she made her way to the kitchen. The housekeeper looked up from the dough she was kneading. "Ah, Signora, you are awake? It is nearly 4 o'clock." "4? Why didn't someone wake me?" Evelyn asked, alarmed. "How is Caroline?" "The Nina is much better. She asked for breakfast, and Mr. Whitaker has been reading to her." Mrs. Rodriguez's usually stern expression softened. "He said you were not to be disturbed. You needed sleep after your care of Caroline." Evelyn felt a rush of gratitude for Randy's consideration. "I should check on her." She found them in Caroline's room, Randy seated on the edge of the bed with a book open on his lap. Caroline was propped up on pillows, still pale but with a spark of life back in her blue eyes. Both looked up as Evelyn entered. "You're awake," Randy said with a smile, closing the book. "I slept far later than I intended," Evelyn replied. She moved to Caroline's bedside. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" The endearment slipped out naturally, and Evelyn wondered if she had overstepped, but Caroline didn't seem to mind. "Better," the girl said. "My head doesn't hurt anymore." "That's wonderful news." Evelyn placed a gentle hand on Caroline's forehead, confirming what her eyes told her. The fever was truly gone. "Are you hungry? I could make you some broth." "Mrs. Rodriguez already brought some." Caroline glanced at her father, then back to Evelyn. "Papa says you took care of me all night, every night." "We all took care of you," Evelyn corrected. "Your father hardly left your side. But you knew what to do." Caroline's gaze was direct, assessing in that unnervingly adult way she sometimes had. "Thank you." The simple words, spoken without the girl's usual reserve, touched Evelyn deeply. "You're very welcome." In the days that followed, as Caroline regained her strength, a subtle shift occurred in the household. The careful distance that had defined their relationships began to soften around the edges. Randy sought out Evelyn's company in the evenings, asking about her day rather than retreating to his study. Caroline, still weak from her illness, allowed Evelyn to help her with small tasks that previously would have prompted stubborn independence. A week after the fever broke, Evelyn sat with Caroline on the porch swing, reading aloud from Treasure Island, one of the few children's books in the house. The girl listened with rapt attention, asking questions about words she didn't understand. "You make the story sound exciting," Caroline said when Evelyn paused at the end of a chapter. "Miss Watkins used to read in a voice that made me sleepy." Evelyn laughed. "My brother George used to say the same thing. He claimed my pirate voice was the best in all of Boston." "Can you do it again?" Caroline asked, a rare smile lighting her face. She obliged with an exaggerated pirate growl that made the child giggle. It was a sound so unexpected and delightful that Evelyn nearly lost her place in the book. Randy found them there an hour later, heads bent together over the book, Evelyn patiently helping Caroline sound out some of the more challenging words. "I see the patient is feeling stronger," he said, leaning against the porch railing. Caroline looked up, her expression brighter than it had been since her sickness. "Evelyn's teaching me to read the hard words. I can almost read a whole page by myself now." "Evelyn," Randy repeated, raising an eyebrow at the familiar use of her name. "I told her she could call me Evelyn instead of Miss Young," she explained, "since we're reading together so often now." Randy nodded, something unreadable crossing his features. "Dinner will be ready soon. Don't tire yourself, Caroline." That evening, after Caroline had gone to bed, Evelyn found Randy on the porch, staring at the stars that blanketed the Texas sky. She hesitated in the doorway, still uncertain of her welcome in these quiet moments. "Why don't you join me?" he asked, sensing her presence. Feeling pleased, Evelyn settled into one of the rocking chairs, wrapping a light shawl around her shoulders against the cool evening air. "Caroline is sleeping soundly. I think she'll be back to her full strength soon." "Thanks to you." Randy turned to face her. "I'm grateful, more than I can properly express. It was nothing you wouldn't have done. She could have recovered even if I hadn't been here," she replied. "You just hadn't had the practice I've had with childhood illnesses." "It was far from nothing." His voice was quiet but intense. "You stayed with her without complaint, knew exactly what remedies to try and how to comfort her. I've never seen Caroline take to anyone the way she's taken to you this past week." Evelyn felt a flush of pleasure at his words. "She's a remarkable child. I've grown quite fond of her." "I can see that. And she of you?" He hesitated, then added, "I was wrong to keep you at arm's length when you first arrived. I was protecting something that perhaps didn't need protection." "Your memories of Emma," Evelyn said gently. "I understand, Randy. I never meant to replace her. I know that now." He looked back at the stars. "It's strange how grief becomes a companion over time. I thought letting someone new into our lives would be a betrayal, but instead, she asked when he didn't finish his sentence. "Instead, it feels like light returning to a dark room." The honesty of his words hung in the air between them, creating a moment of connection that needed no further explanation. They sat in a comforting silence until the chill drove them back inside. Chapter 6. The Visitor. The following week brought a new development to Whitaker Ranch. Evelyn was in the kitchen discussing menu plans with Mrs. Rodriguez when the sound of an approaching carriage drew their attention. "Are we expecting visitors?" Evelyn asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Rodriguez moved to the window, her expression changing subtly. "It is Mrs. Preston, Mr. Whitaker's sister." "His sister?" "He didn't mention she was coming." "I do not think he knew," the housekeeper said carefully. Evelyn smoothed her hair and removed her apron, feeling eager to meet Randy's sister. Randy was out checking the herd with Joshua, and Caroline was resting after her morning lessons as she still hadn't fully recovered from her sickness. Evelyn took a breath and went to greet their unexpected visitor. A woman stepped down from a fancy carriage with the assistance of her driver. She was a tall, elegantly dressed woman whose bearing immediately spoke of city life rather than ranch country. Her gaze swept over the house critically before landing on Evelyn. "You must be the bride," the woman said by way of greeting, her tone making the word sound slightly suspect. "I'm Margaret Preston, Thomas's sister. I'm Evelyn Young." She extended her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Preston. I'm assuming Randy hasn't mentioned me, which is not surprising, considering he also failed to mention you until the deed was done." Margaret's handshake was brief and perfunctory. "I understand you've been here, 3 weeks now?" "Nearly 4, Evelyn replied, maintaining her composure despite the woman's obvious disapproval. "Please, come inside. You must be tired after your journey." Inside, Mrs. Rodriguez prepared tea, while Evelyn showed Margaret to the parlor. The older woman inspected everything with the sharp eye of someone looking for fault. "I see you haven't changed things too much," she said, removing her gloves. "Yet. We've been focused on Caroline's health recently," Evelyn explained. "She had a serious fever last week." Margaret's expression registered genuine concern for the first time. "Caroline was ill? And my brother didn't send word? He always lets me know when the child is sick." "It happened quite suddenly, and she's recovered well." Evelyn expertly poured tea into the cups Mrs. Rodriguez had brought. "Maybe Randy didn't want to worry you unnecessarily." "Typical," Margaret sighed. "He's always kept troubles to himself, even as a child." Evelyn answered the other woman's questions about Caroline's health, but also noticed that she hadn't asked to see the girl. She was glad that Caroline was tucked in her bed, still resting. The conversation had moved on from Caroline's health to Randy's childhood when the man in question returned, stopping short in the doorway at the sight of his sister. "Margaret," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "This is unexpected." "Clearly," his sister replied dryly. "Had I waited for an invitation to meet your new wife, I might have waited forever." Randy shot Evelyn an apologetic look. "I see you two have met." "We've been getting acquainted," Evelyn said, offering him a reassuring smile. "Mrs. Preston was just telling me about your childhood in Austin." "All the most embarrassing parts, I'm sure," Randy said, some of the tension leaving his shoulders as he sat beside Evelyn on the sofa. Margaret watched this interaction closely. "Your bride tells me Caroline has been ill." Randy nodded. "She had a bad fever, but she's recovering well. Evelyn hardly left her side for 3 days." "How fortunate that she has experience with such things," Margaret said, her tone suggesting she found it a little too convenient. "Boston is quite different from Texas. I hope the adjustment hasn't been too difficult." "Texas is certainly different," Evelyn acknowledged, "but beautiful in its own way. And please, call me Evelyn." Margaret responded with a single nod. "I assume Caroline hasn't been able to attend to her studies since she has been so sick." "Really, Randy, you should have sent for me." Randy cleared his throat. "Actually, Evelyn has been helping Caroline with her reading." Margaret's eyes darted to Evelyn with surprise. "You have?" Evelyn began to respond, but Randy beat her to it. She trained to be a teacher. Margaret began to respond when Caroline's appearance in the doorway prevented further conversation. The girl brightened at the sight of her aunt. "Aunt Margaret?" she exclaimed, with more animation than Evelyn had yet seen from her. It was obvious that Caroline had a close bond with her aunt. "Did you bring me a book from Austin?" Margaret's severe expression softened as she embraced her niece. "Of course I did, darling, though I hear you have a new reading teacher now." "Evelyn has been teaching me. She makes the stories exciting, and she doesn't mind when I ask questions." Margaret raised an eyebrow at this enthusiastic endorsement. "Is that so?" Dinner that evening was a tense affair. Margaret questioned Evelyn repeatedly about her background, her family, and her reasons for becoming a mail-order bride, her skepticism barely concealed beneath polite inquiry. "It seems rather desperate," she remarked, "traveling thousands of miles to marry a stranger." "Margaret," Randy warned. Evelyn set down her fork calmly. "I wouldn't call it desperation, Mrs. Preston. I call it seeking a new purpose. After raising my siblings, I found myself at a crossroads. Your brother's advertisement presented an opportunity that appealed to me." "And what opportunity was that exactly?" Margaret pressed. "A comfortable home, financial security?" "The chance to be useful again," Evelyn replied steadily. "To help raise a child, to build a home with someone who values practicality as I do." She met Randy's gaze briefly. "And yes, a new beginning in a place where possibilities seem as vast as the horizon." Randy reached across the table and covered Evelyn's hand with his own, a gesture not lost on his sister. "She has brought much-needed life back to this house, Margaret." Was his sister's only response, though her sharp eyes missed nothing. Later that night, after Caroline had been tucked in and Margaret had retired to the guest room, Evelyn stood outside on the porch, needing a moment of solitude after the stressful evening. The stars were particularly bright, a silver dusting across the velvet darkness. She heard the door open behind her and knew without turning that it was Randy. "I apologize for my sister," he said, coming to stand beside her. "She's always been overly protective." "She loves you and Caroline," Evelyn replied. "I understand her concerns. A hasty marriage to a stranger from Boston. I'd be suspicious too in her position." Randy shook his head. "You're being generous." Her questioning bordered on interrogation. "She needs to be sure of me." Evelyn turned to face him. "Are you? Sure of me, I mean?" In the moonlight, Randy's expression was solemn as he studied her. "I thought I knew what I wanted when I placed that advertisement. I wanted someone practical and kind, to help with Caroline and to bring a woman's presence back to the ranch." He stepped closer, I never expected someone like you, Evelyn. Someone who would face down Texas storms to find me, who would sit up for 3 nights with a sick child not her own, and who would face my sister's inquisition with such grace. Randy, let me finish, he said gently. When Emma died, I thought that part of my life was over. I didn't expect to feel this again. This, Evelyn whispered, her heart suddenly racing. Instead of answering with words, Randy closed the distance between them. His hand came up to cup her cheek, tentative and questioning. When she didn't pull away, he lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers. It was a kiss so gentle it was barely there, yet it sent warmth coursing through Evelyn's entire body. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers in the darkness. Evelyn found herself smiling, a genuine smile that came from somewhere deep within. That was unexpected, she said softly. Pleasantly so, I hope. His voice had a gruff quality she hadn't heard before. Very pleasantly, she confirmed, surprising herself with her boldness. Randy smiled then, a real smile that transformed his serious face into something boyish and hopeful. Margaret will have more to disapprove of now. Evelyn laughed. I'm sure she will survive the shock. The next morning, Evelyn rose early and slipped outside before the rest of the household was stirring. The area behind the kitchen had been neglected for years, but she saw potential in the sun-drenched patch of earth. After breakfast, she approached Randy with her idea. Garden, he repeated, considering the space she had shown him. Emma started one, but after she died, he trailed off. I understand if you'd rather I didn't, Evelyn said quickly as she remembered the last time she had tried to make changes. No, Randy shook his head. No, it's a good idea. The ground's fertile here. With his blessing, she began preparing the soil that afternoon. Margaret watched from the porch, her expression dubious. Gardening is hard work in this climate, she remarked. The heat will wilt those eastern flowers you're probably planting. Which is why I'll be planting vegetables that can withstand the Texas sun, along with some hardier blooms, Evelyn replied, turning the soil with a determined hand. Mrs. Rodriguez has been kind enough to advise me on what grows well here. To her surprise, Caroline appeared, her small hands eager to help. Can I plant something too? Of course, Evelyn said. Everyone should grow something of their own at least once. By the end of the week, when Margaret prepared to return to Austin, the garden plot had been fully prepared and the first seeds planted. Evelyn stood with Randy and Caroline, waving as Margaret's carriage pulled away. She still doesn't approve of me, Evelyn observed. Randy slipped his arm around her waist, a gesture that felt both new and completely natural. She will. Eventually. Caroline looked up at them, her small face thoughtful. I like the garden, she said decisively. And I like having Evelyn here. Coming from Caroline, this simple declaration meant everything. Evelyn felt something warm and unfamiliar expanding in her chest. She felt the sense of belonging she had been seeking since she first read Randy's advertisement in that Boston newspaper. That evening, as the 3 of them sat on the porch after dinner, Randy reading aloud, while Evelyn mended and Caroline drawing a picture on a slate, she realized that somehow, without her noticing exactly when, the Whitaker Ranch had begun to feel like home. Chapter 7, Hearts United. By early June, Evelyn's garden had transformed from bare earth to vibrant life. Neat rows of vegetables stretched on one side. Beans climbed their trellises, tomatoes formed green globes on sturdy vines, and peppers turned their faces to the Texas sun. On the other side, wildflowers and hardy roses created colors that brightened the approach to the kitchen door. She knelt in the cool morning hours, carefully checking her plants as she did each day before the heat grew too intense. The garden had become her sanctuary. Mrs. Rodriguez gradually shared her knowledge of local growing techniques, while Evelyn contributed the companion planting methods her mother had taught her long ago. Those tomatoes are coming along nicely, Randy observed, appearing beside her with a cup of coffee, which he handed to her. He'd developed the habit of bringing her coffee in the garden, a small ritual that never failed to warm her heart. Another week, perhaps, she agreed, accepting the cup gratefully. The beans will be ready even sooner. He surveyed the thriving plot with evident pride. You've accomplished more in 3 months than most newcomers do in a year. I had help, she reminded him, thinking of how Caroline had diligently watered the seedlings each evening and how Randy had built the trellises and fencing on Sunday afternoons. He reached down to help her to her feet, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. In the 3 months since her arrival, these small touches had multiplied, each one strengthening the connection between them. Since that first kiss beneath the stars, Randy had become increasingly demonstrative, though always with a restraint that respected the newness of their relationship. I was thinking, he said casually, that tomorrow might be a good day for a break from routine. The cattle are settled, Joshua can handle things, and Caroline has been asking to visit the creek now that the weather's warmed. That sounds lovely, Evelyn replied. I could pack a lunch. I already arranged that with Mrs. Rodriguez. A smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. Consider it a surprise. Later that morning, Evelyn sat with Caroline at the kitchen table, continuing their daily lessons. The girl had made remarkable progress with her reading in recent weeks, approaching books with an enthusiasm that delighted Evelyn. And I write a story of my own? Caroline asked as they finished her arithmetic exercises, like the ones you used to write for your brothers and sister? Evelyn had recently shared stories about her own childhood, including the small illustrated tales she had created for her siblings during long winter evenings. I think that's a wonderful idea, Evelyn said. What kind of story would you like to write? The girl's brow furrowed in concentration. A story about a girl and her horse, and maybe her family. The simple addition of family spoke volumes about the changes in their household. In the 3 months since Evelyn's arrival, Caroline had gradually lowered her defenses, allowing herself to form an attachment that had begun during her illness and strengthened with each shared book, lesson, and garden session. I have some paper in my desk drawer, Evelyn said. Shall we get it after lunch? Can I use your colored pencils too? Of course. Artists need the right tools. The afternoon passed pleasantly, with Caroline absorbed in her story creation and Evelyn attending to the mending, a task she had taken over from Mrs. Rodriguez, who had gratefully relinquished it. The housekeeper, initially so reserved, had become an ally and increasingly a friend, especially after witnessing Evelyn's devotion during Caroline's illness. That evening after dinner, as Randy closed his ledgers in the small study where he tracked the ranch's finances, Evelyn brought him a cup of coffee and settled into the chair opposite his desk. You're looking thoughtful, he observed. I was just thinking about how much has changed since I arrived. How different everything feels now compared to that first awkward day. For the better, I hope? Very much so. She traced the rim of her own coffee cup. I received a letter from Rebecca today. The postmaster delivered it when he brought the feed order. She's expecting a baby in the winter. That's wonderful news, Randy said, studying her expression. You miss them. It wasn't a question, but Evelyn answered anyway. Yes. But not in the way I expected to. It's more, I wish they could see this place, meet you and Caroline, and understand the life I've found here. Perhaps they will someday. San Antonio isn't the end of the world, despite what your Boston friends might think. His tone was light, but his eyes were serious as they held hers. You've made a real home here, Evelyn, for all of us. That night, Evelyn lay awake longer than usual, reflecting on Randy's words. Home. The ranch had indeed become home in a way she hadn't anticipated when she'd boarded that train in Boston. What had begun as a practical arrangement had transformed into something far richer. A life with purpose, connection, and increasingly, love. The next morning dawned clear and perfect for their outing. Randy loaded a large picnic basket into the wagon while Evelyn helped Caroline pack a small bag with her sketchbook and pencils. The creek was only a short ride away, but it felt like a grand adventure as they set out, the Texas landscape spreading around them in its early summer glory. The creek wound through a small grove of cottonwoods, creating a shaded haven against the Texas heat. Randy spread a blanket in a grassy clearing, while Caroline immediately ran to investigate a family of turtles sunning themselves on a log. "Stay where we can see you," Randy called, his protective instincts never fully at rest. "I will, Papa," she promised, already absorbed in her wildlife observation. Evelyn helped Randy unpack the generous lunch Mrs. Rodriguez had prepared, which was fried chicken, cornbread, potato salad, and fresh lemonade. The housekeeper had even included a small cake. "This is quite a feast," Evelyn remarked. "What are we celebrating?" Randy arranged the food with uncharacteristic attention to presentation. "3 months since you arrived. I thought it deserved acknowledgement." The simple statement touched Evelyn deeply. For a man of few words, this recognition spoke volumes about how he valued her presence in their lives. They ate leisurely, watching Caroline explore the creek's edge, her dark curls bouncing as she moved from one discovery to another. The girl had blossomed in recent months, her natural curiosity emerging from behind the reserved facade she had maintained when Evelyn first arrived. After lunch, Randy leaned back against a tree trunk, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something," he said. "Oh?" She felt a flutter of anticipation. "The ranch has been doing well this year, better than expected." He gestured toward the horizon. "I've been thinking about expanding, purchasing the Harmon property that adjoins our eastern pasture. That sounds like a significant undertaking." "It would be," he agreed. "It would mean more cattle and more hands to hire. The house would need expanding too, eventually." "It will?" Evelyn felt confused. "Why?" "Because," he hesitated, uncharacteristically unsure as he took a deep breath. "Because I've been thinking about the future. Our future." Before he could continue, Caroline came running back to the blanket, her hands cupped carefully in front of her. "Look what I found!" she exclaimed, kneeling to show them a tiny frog nestled in her palms. "Isn't he perfect?" "He certainly is," Evelyn agreed, smiling at the girl's enthusiasm. "What will you name him?" "Emerald," Caroline decided, stroking the frog's back gently with one finger. "Because he's green and special." After admiring the creature one more time, Caroline carefully returned it to the creek. When she came back, she sat close to Evelyn, surprising her by leaning against her side. "I made something for you," Caroline said timidly. "It's in my bag." She retrieved a folded paper from her small satchel and handed it to Evelyn with solemn ceremony. She opened it carefully to find a meticulously drawn picture of 3 figures standing before a house with a garden. The figures were labeled in Caroline's improving handwriting: Papa, Caroline, and Mama Evelyn. She felt her breath catch. It was the first time Caroline had referred to her as anything close to mother. "It's our family," the child explained unnecessarily. "Do you like it?" "Oh, Caroline," Evelyn said, emotion thickening her voice. "It's the most beautiful picture I've ever received." "You don't mind that I called you Mama Evelyn?" Caroline asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Aunt Margaret said I should ask first. I might shorten it to just Mama sometimes." Evelyn glanced at Randy, who looked as moved as she felt, then back to Caroline. "I would be honored to be your Mama, if that's what you'd like to call me." Caroline nodded decisively. "I would, because that's who you are now." The simple depiction, delivered with a child's straightforward logic, brought unexpected tears to Evelyn's eyes. She hugged Caroline close, meeting Randy's gaze over the girl's dark curls. The tenderness in his expression told her everything his reserved nature often found difficult to express. Chapter 8. The Ring. The rest of the afternoon passed in simple pleasures. Randy taught Caroline how to skip stones across the creek's surface. Evelyn read aloud from the book they had brought. All 3 were collaborating on a small dam of stones and sticks that sent the creek water bubbling in new directions. It was twilight by the time they returned to the ranch. Caroline was drowsy in the wagon beside Evelyn, her head gradually settling onto Evelyn's shoulder as she drifted to sleep. "She's completely worn out," Randy observed softly as he lifted the sleeping child from the wagon. It was a perfect day, Evelyn replied, gathering their belongings. After Caroline had been tucked into bed, Evelyn went to the porch, savoring the evening coolness. The ranch was peaceful at this hour, with only the distant lowing of cattle and the chorus of night insects breaking the silence. Randy joined her, bringing 2 glasses of lemonade. "She called you Mama Evelyn," he said, handing her a glass. "I was as surprised as you," Evelyn admitted. "Honored, but surprised. She sees what I see, that you've become essential to this family." He set his glass down and reached into his pocket. Which brings me back to what I was trying to say at the creek before we were interrupted. From his pocket, he withdrew a small box that Evelyn recognized immediately as the type that might hold a ring. Her heart began to race. "When we married, it was a practical arrangement," Randy said, his voice deeper than usual. "I needed a mother for Caroline. You needed a new purpose, and we both thought companionship would be enough." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold band set with a small diamond. "This was my mother's. I should have given it to you months ago, but I wanted to wait until..." "Until what?" Evelyn prompted gently when he hesitated. "Until I was certain you understood that I'm asking for more than practicality now." He took her hand. "These past months have shown me what a remarkable woman you are, Evelyn Whitaker. You've brought life back to this ranch, to Caroline, to me. I find myself thinking of the future in ways I hadn't dared to in years." He took a breath. "I want to do this properly this time. Evelyn, will you stay as my wife, not just in name and arrangement, but in every way that matters? Will you build a life with me, a family beyond what we already have?" Evelyn felt tears welling in her eyes for the second time that day. "Randy Whitaker, I believe I've already answered that question with every day I've spent here. But yes, with all my heart, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her close for a kiss that held none of the restraint of their earlier embraces. When they finally parted, Evelyn rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never expected this," she confessed. "When I left Boston, I thought I was being practical and sensible. I never imagined I would find love again." "Again?" Randy asked, surprised. "Yes, again. I loved my family, my siblings. I thought that was enough and that romantic love was something I had set aside for their sake." She looked up at him. "I was wrong." Their peaceful moment was interrupted by the arrival of Joshua on horseback, returning from town with the mail. He tipped his hat respectfully as he dismounted. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker. Got some letters from town." He handed Randy a small bundle, including one marked "Urgent" from Boston. Evelyn felt a flicker of concern as Randy thanked Joshua and handed her the letter. She recognized George's handwriting immediately. Inside, she quickly scanned the contents, her expression growing troubled. "It's George. He has lost his position in New York due to some kind of dispute with his employer. He's asking if he might come to Texas just until he finds his feet again." Randy studied her face. "You're worried I'll object?" "It would be a disruption," Evelyn acknowledged. "Another person in the house, and he's never been particularly skilled at ranch work." To her surprise, Randy smiled. "Evelyn, your family is our family now. Of course your brother must come if he needs our help. Besides," he added thoughtfully, "I've been thinking of hiring a proper accountant for the ranch accounts as we expand. Perhaps George might find a new direction here, as you have." She stared at him, overwhelmed by his immediate acceptance. "You truly mean that?" "Family takes care of family," he said simply. "Write to him tomorrow. Tell him there's a place for him here for as long as he needs it." In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that her decision to answer that newspaper advertisement had not been just practical but providential. She had traveled west seeking purpose, and found not only that, but a love she had never dared to imagine. Epilogue. 1 year later. The addition to the ranch house was finally complete, expanding the structure to accommodate their growing family. Evelyn stood in the nursery, arranging wildflowers in a vase on the dresser, while sunlight streamed through the curtains she had sewn herself. At 7 months pregnant, she moved more carefully these days, one hand often resting on the swell of her belly where new life grew. Randy had insisted on hiring additional help, concerned that she was overexerting herself, but Evelyn had found a balance that worked. She oversaw the household, continued Caroline's education, and maintained her garden, which had expanded to twice its original size. Outside, she could hear Caroline's laughter as she helped her Uncle George feed the chickens. Her brother had adapted to ranch life with surprising enthusiasm, and his accounting skills proved invaluable as Randy expanded the operation. The Harmon property was now officially part of Whitaker Ranch, and cattle grazed contentedly across the expanded pastures. "There you are," Randy said, appearing in the doorway. "I've been looking for you." "Just adding the final touches," Evelyn explained, gesturing to the nursery. "Though we have some time yet." Randy crossed to her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "It's perfect, like everything you do." "Hardly everything," Evelyn laughed. "Mrs. Rodriguez still won't let me make tortillas. She says mine are an embarrassment to Texas." "A small defeat in an otherwise victorious campaign," Randy teased, his hand moving to rest alongside hers on her belly. "How are you feeling today?" "Wonderful," she answered truthfully. "A bit tired, but wonderful." He guided her to the porch, where they had taken to sitting in the evenings to watch the sunset. Caroline and George joined them, the girl chattering excitedly about a nest of kittens discovered in the barn. "Can we keep them all, Papa, please?" she pleaded. At 8, she had lost none of her passion for all living creatures. "Uncle George says they'll make excellent mousers." "Does he now?" Randy raised an eyebrow at George, who shrugged good-naturedly. "I might have mentioned that every ranch needs cats," George admitted, "but I leave the final decision to the master of the house." "The master of the house consults with his wife on such matters," Randy replied, looking to Evelyn with the smile he reserved just for her. "I think we can find homes for most of them," Evelyn said diplomatically, "but perhaps one or two could stay, if Caroline takes responsibility for them." "I will, I promise," Caroline exclaimed, hugging Evelyn carefully around her belly. "Thank you, Mama." She dashed off, presumably to share the good news with the kittens. George followed, calling after her to wait, leaving Randy and Evelyn alone on the porch. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the ring he had placed there a year ago. "Happy?" he asked, a question he still posed occasionally, as if marveling at their good fortune. "Completely," she assured him. "I was just thinking about that advertisement you placed, and how close I came to ignoring it." "Thank God you didn't," he said fervently. "I can't imagine what our lives would be like if you hadn't answered." She leaned against him, watching as the Texas sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "Sometimes the longest roads lead exactly where you're meant to be," she said softly. "I traveled all the way from Boston to find my true home." His arm tightened around her shoulders. "And I waited 5 years alone, to find the heart of my home again." As twilight settled over Whitaker Ranch, Evelyn felt the baby move beneath her hand. Another chapter was about to begin in a story that had started with a practical arrangement between strangers and had blossomed into a love that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Behind them, the lamp in the window cast a warm glow. It was a beacon of the home they had built together. It was proof that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the most perfect destinations.